All right, welcome to the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast. This is Travis Pangburn. Today I'm speaking with David Mcafee. He is a journalist and author of No Sacred Cows, Investigating Myths, Cults, and the Supernatural, as well as the founder of the Party of Reason and Progress, a group that advocates for evidence-based policymaking. Thanks for coming on today, David.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. So what does the Party of Reason and Progress do?
The Party of Reason and Progress, I founded it first in 2010 after the rise of the Tea Party, and I felt that there needed to be something in politics that people could gravitate toward if they valued evidence and logic and reason over emotion, which is largely what I saw the Tea Party acting on, and fear. And so I created it back then. It didn't really gain any steam. And then when Donald Trump was elected, I announced that I was launching it back up again. And there was just a huge interest in people wanting to inject evidence into policymaking, which seems like it should be so obvious that we already do it. But the fact is that not only do we not really do it, but also people actively oppose evidence-based policymaking. So we're trying to change that.
Yeah, well, that's great, and that's a noble pursuit. And I think the more we can show that it's popular to think to these politicians, I think that's going to help. I think sometimes they might think that well, I'm not sure if people want these kind of platforms that kind of value evidence. So yeah, I think what they do is they rely on kind of the lowest common denominator in their base, and they play down to them, thinking that what they want is strength no matter what, and being decisive regardless of what you're talking about or whether you know what you're talking about. And it turns out there's a sizable chunk of the population that really values these things, and I feel like if we could all get organized better, then we could make a difference. Yeah, well, maybe there's this myth amongst those who are in politics, say the Trumps of the world, that think that, I don't think he's thinking this, but they think maybe if we have a scientific platform or a more scientific platform or a more intellectually based platform, there are a significant amount of people that just aren't going to get it.
Yep, and that's, to an extent, it's true. These issues are attacked by people on both sides, really. But recently, on Twitter, for instance, our political group has a lot of activity going on Twitter, and people have come to us and said that they don't even believe in evidence-based politics, that they believe that we should elect politicians who think with their gut and just act accordingly. And it's something that is too common in the United States, but I think even then the existence of those people is overstated when you think about all the people who also value the opposite, who want somebody who will sit down and think about things, who will challenge their perspectives, who will look at other countries, at opposing political parties, and hope for good ideas from anywhere, really.
Yeah, and someone who values intellectual discourse, having discussions with their peers and other people, and with the people in general about policy.
Yep, that's something that recently has been in the public eye because of John McCain's his death, and people have been talking about how he was actually one of the last conservative voices who would sit down with his liberal counterparts, his colleagues, and have a reasonable discussion and share ideas. And even when they disagreed vigorously on serious issues, they could still have a friendly discussion about it and hope to provide evidence to change the other's mind. And that's something that's lacking too much today in American politics.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the time when McCain, during I guess when he was running, there was a woman that stood up on stage and said that, I think Barack Obama's an Arab and he's evil and stuff. And then John McCain's like, no, he's a great man. We just, from an ideological standpoint, we disagree on a lot of things, and we're going to have discussions and thorough debate, but he's not these conspiracy things that, that even Donald Trump was buying into. I think he still buys into. Yep, yeah, that's something he's never completely divorced from, and in general, that's just something that is largely lacking in American politics right now. If you look at the campaign between Trump and Hillary Clinton, you didn't see any on really either side anything similar to what we saw then with McCain defending Obama, when everybody on the far right, anybody on the right at all, was attacking him so vigorously that it would have been easy for McCain just to give into that and kind of ride that wave. And he chose not to do that. He chose to stand up for Obama and say he would make a good president. And to have him say his opponent would make a good president is something that you couldn't even imagine in today's political outlook.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump and Hillary thing was just a bunch of shit slinging as far as I'm concerned, and it was just like, just try not to get any on you while you watch it, and you know, it just, that whole thing was just a freak show, and I think mostly everyone agrees. I bet even Donald and Hillary would probably agree with that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think so, and I think that even in the debates during this campaign period, normally when there's a debate between political opponents, it's kind of their opportunity to show off their ability to have rational discourse and reasonable debate. And we saw similar things like that with Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, for instance. But we didn't even see in the debate cycle any version of irrational discourse. It was just, like you said, flinging it.
Yeah, and there's some irrational behavior. I mean, like with Trump, like there's reporters with cameras asking him stuff about McCain's death, and rather than addressing it, he's just sitting there with his arms crossed, silent.
Which says more than if he had said something, probably.
Right. So, yeah, it's crazy making, man. So let's talk about myths for a bit. What is the most common myth you come across?
Oh, man. I would say the most common myth I come across is creation myths, because I deal with those mostly. And when I majored in religious studies, I had an emphasis in Christianity and Mediterranean religions, and I studied creation myths mostly, comparing them culture to culture, looking at their similarities and differences. And basically, that's kind of the source of what got me started on writing about myths, cults, the supernatural, about all those things, was because of religion. And I started there and kind of expanded and realized that there are so many similarities between religion and other unproven supernatural beliefs like psychics and ghosts and basically anything. And then it grew from there, and I realized that all false beliefs have these commonalities, and kind of that's the genesis of No Sacred Cows. Right.
Very cool. What should the penalty be for a parent who indoctrinates their child into a creationist belief system?
I personally don't really have a good answer for that. I'm more of the type to emphasize public education so that we can help combat false beliefs that are taught to children. I feel like in America right now, we largely ignore religion in our schools, and you would think that would be a good thing, but we don't even teach it from a secular, non-biased approach like they do in parts of Europe, most of Europe, which really makes our kids more religious because they get all of their information from their parents who are indoctrinating them. So I feel like if we just improved our educational system and taught religion from a phenomenological approach at an early age, we could actually reduce those levels of not just religiosity, but of fundamentalism and therefore religious violence.
Yeah. And and also as far as the education system goes, it's kind of the same up here in Canada. There's a severe lack of skepticism in one's vocabulary when they fall into when they're seduced by myths.
Mm-hmm.
And how important is it that we improve on skepticism in the school system?
Oh, I feel like it's one of the most important things. I feel like you can look at our
current political climate in the United States and say that if we just had a little bit more skepticism, a little bit more rational thought, critical thinking taught in schools, maybe people wouldn't be making all these big blunders and believing fake news that then influences the election. And it's just something that I think every day, something that we could fix. It's something that could be done. These are preventable tragedies, basically.
Yeah, and I think it goes to the root of the problem with education as it stands right now in the West. How, I mean, kids are still being taught facts and things to memorize, and really, I think kids really need to be learning how to learn, how to go about discovering what is and what isn't and what ought to be. And I just think these things are so much more important than memorizing, a certain cultural aspect of some tribe and then regurgitating that onto a piece of paper in a test.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And recently in the state of Arizona, I'm in California and they're nearby, and I was following their news, and their K through 12 science standards were amended and improved just as they should be every year. And it turned, instead of those improvements going through, they were amended by the Trump administration. And I read through the changes between what the scientists and teachers recommended and what the Trump administration approved for the new science standards. And it was almost exclusively taking out the big picture concepts and how to think and how to problem solve and putting in memorization, like memorize this, that. That's pretty much the standard for what they were doing. And I couldn't at first understand why they would want to do this. And then I just realized they don't want people to be thinking critically. They would rather people just memorize and get through school. And they're kind of cutting off any skepticism at the bud there.
Yeah, skepticism doesn't work well for people like Trump who just can't stop lying. And I mean, Trump's not the only. I shouldn't just pick on Trump, but he's just kind of who's there. But there's so much lying, and the antidote to lying, I think, is skeptical inquiry into what people are saying.
Exactly, and when you see in the political climate right now, what's happening is Trump and other politicians are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They say contradicting things. They lie without regard to the truth because they know that if they flood the marketplace with all these different quotes and statements that contradict one another, that people will latch on to whatever they want to latch on to. And a Trump supporter can, oh, well, he said this one time, and they will be justified in their opinion in their mind. And so it doesn't matter that he said something else another time, and they're figuring that out, I think.
Right, and it doesn't matter what the news reports are on Donald Trump anymore, because he disparages routinely everything they have to say, and basically in a lot of people's eyes in the United States, it seems like they don't even believe a thing that comes out of major news outlets anymore.
It's unfortunate state of affairs when the President of the United States is undermining the credibility of the media on such a consistent basis, because even George W. Bush has come out even just a year ago and spoke of the importance of the media and how it's the job of reporters to call out people in power and to report on what's happening around them. And Trump just doesn't understand that. And from day one, he has been attacking all forms of media that don't aggressively suck up to him and post pro-Trump news, is what he calls it. But I feel like it shouldn't have to be pro or anti anything if they're just reporting on the facts, which a lot of times they are when they get that criticism from him.
Right. So what is the most dangerous myth out there?
I think lately the most dangerous myth I've been running into has been the myth that faith healing is a legitimate source of medical intervention.
Yeah.
And in the book, I talk with people from the Church of Christ Scientists who believe you can pray away any illness, including death. They think you can resurrect people with prayer. And I have personally since then been dealing with other people who really take strongly the notion that God created us this way and we don't need Western medicine, and it's just something that I hate to see all these people, mostly children, dying every day because of that myth.
Yeah, that shit fucking pisses me off. And it's like, but how does a religious person, particularly the one that believes in the personal God, get away from this? It's like, if you believe that this God actually exists and is all powerful, of course they're able to intervene and cure you of cancer. If you pray, it's like I don't think anyone who's an actual genuine believer can get away from that.
I've actually talked to Christians and to other believers about this before, and where I've tried to give them a loophole there to try and help them use medicine and also stay in line with their faith. And basically what I said, and what other people have said in the past, is that maybe the medicine that these doctors are trying to give them is actually the answer to their prayers that they've had and that all these other people have prayed. And so maybe God is working through these doctors to try and help you. And so I've tried to encourage people to pursue medical treatment by using this logic. Of course, I realize that it's apologetics and mental gymnastics, but at the same time, I would rather them live and learn that at a later date than risk it all.
Well, and it seems like now, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know what your take is on this, but I've seen quite a few cases of parents denying their kids medical care based on their religious faith. The kid dies, and then the parents are prosecuted. Have you seen many cases like this?
The unfortunate thing is that doesn't happen as often as it should.
Yeah.
It does happen occasionally, but it really, here in the United States, it depends on the state in which it occurs. And there are 6 states that you can get away with murdering your kid if it's in the name of faith healing. And so the other states, not so much. They have, at least to a certain extent, if there's a murder involved, then you'll get prosecuted. But likely, if it stops short of death, if you basically torture your kid with faith healing practices or any of this stuff, then you're going to be pretty much off scot-free. But in those 6 states, you can kill your child, and then as long as you did it because Jesus told you to, then it's completely fine.
Yeah, well, I think we naturally have to jump to something that's really important to me, and that's genital mutilation of children. And this is a myth that reeks still in the West. It's like we are still genitally mutilating boys over here, and for non-medically necessary reasons.
Yep, I actually talk about that in No Sacred Cows. There's a chapter in which I tell all the times that not all the times, but some of the more high-profile times in which I've been wrong, and how I learned from those experiences, because I think that's an important part of thinking critically and of thinking like a scientist, is basically recognizing when you've been incorrect about something and then being able to move on. So that's the name of the chapter. Admit you're wrong and move on. And I talk about how I used to think that if I had a son that I would get him circumcised because I was circumcised, and because of all the typical arguments I'm sure you've heard in the past. Yeah. And over time, I sort of just started looking at the evidence instead of kind of going with my gut instinct, and I treated it more like any other issue where I scientifically evaluate the concepts and look at consent and look at medical necessities. And I've come to the conclusion that it's not an ethical thing to do if there's no medical reason for it. And I find that position has made me kind of a target from a lot of people on various sides, but I write about it in the book about how I acknowledged it and came to that conclusion.
Yeah, we need more people writing and talking about this. I could drop some names, and I'm not going to, of some of the world's most famous intellects and thinkers that believe in some of these pseudo studies that have been done to show that, it's easier to clean your penis if you circumcise your child, or just some of this nonsense that is not founded in any peer-reviewed way. And I gotta tell you, like, this is a poison that is underestimated. It is one of the most morally reprehensible things I see happening in the West, and we still have people apologizing it away at the dinner table like it's, oh yeah, well, I wanted my kid to look like their dad in the shower. Or even worse, I hear this. This is the worst. I hear mothers, when I talk to them about this, that, well, I would never give oral sex to an uncircumcised penis, so that's why I had my son circumcised.
That is sick.
It's like that reasoning. Like, can we just rewind and think and actually analyze what's going on with that reasoning? Like, this is I'm telling you, man, in the future, when people look back at humanity, in this course in history, people are going to look at this particular issue and be like, what the fuck were those advanced people, modern people doing? And they weren't even addressing it, and no one was talking about it. It was just this accepted thing. But man, we're hacking at the most like tender area of a child when they're born, and it's something that will never come back. And one thing I have realized by looking at all this is that in 0 cases, a full circumcision is necessary. It's like, sometimes it might be medically necessary to partly circumcise the tip of the foreskin or the penis, and but I've never seen a journal or a paper published where it says if there is problems at the tip of the penis with the foreskin, we have to take the whole foreskin off. I've never seen a study published and verified of that. So, I mean, this goes deep.
Yeah, I personally haven't investigated that particular issue, but in the end, it really doesn't matter because it stops short. Because before you even get to that point, you have people who are deciding before they're even pregnant that they're going to chop part of their penis off their son, and it's, I don't know. But like I said, I mean, I know what it's like to be on both sides of that debate. I know what it's like to be on both sides of lots of debates. I used to be against marijuana as well, against recreational and medical use. I would say that it should be permanently illegal and that no one should ever use it. And over time, I started to see that there were scientific studies showing medical benefits, and that I had no right to tell anybody they shouldn't do that, and that I had been lied to about certain things, about the consequences of it. And so, just a number of things over time I've evolved on, and I feel like people don't listen to that stuff, don't think about that stuff enough. They kind of avoid remembering that they were wrong, and I'm trying to get people to embrace it.
Yeah, definitely. It's the myth shaking those myths off your shoulders is important.
Yeah.
Let's talk about racism a bit. Okay. What is the state of racism in the United States?
Probably worse than it's been in a long time. It seems like, and I'm not saying that Trump is the cause of this, I'm just saying around the time that Trump rose to popularity and won the election until now, we have seen a prominent rise in white supremacists, which has really caused a prominent rise in people who hate white people because they see white people who want to kill them. And that's completely, I understand why they feel that way. And I think the biggest problem with all of this is that I understand how they think and why they think the way that they do. I had a racist grandma, racist grandpa who I loved very much, despite them being so terrible in that area. And luckily, I never had to witness any bad interactions. I don't think they ever had any. I just heard them in the comfort of their own home saying things that were completely inappropriate. And I kind of learned from that experience that people are scared of the other. People are xenophobic, they're racist, they're against other cultures that go against their sensibilities. And it's all just, it gets worse when it flares up in society like what we're having now.
Yeah. And I try to tell people as much as I can. It's like this idea of grouping people into a race and then saying, oh, and I think this about this whole race. It's like, how are we still doing this and not treating people as individuals?
Yeah,
it's like
another one of those outdated systems that they're going to look back on.
It's like the rise of white supremacists. If that happens to be the case, it's like, how can you then make an assessment and say tweet out, fucking white people?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or the reverse, whatever it is, fucking Asian people, or it's like the Asian driver thing. This is the part of a lot of different comedians' platforms. It's like and I'm actually fine with any form of anything in comedy. I'm all for it. But it's like, but it's like, you know, this happens and they say, you know, Asians are terrible drivers, and everyone knows it's a joke. Mm-hmm. Like, everyone knows it's just a joke. But when it comes out on Twitter, I'm seeing, like, if someone says something like, you know, less white people, it'll have like 1.2 or you know, 1,200 love hearts on that tweet. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, that's like, white supremacy is one thing. But like, I see that as like people willingly clicking the love button on that. And can you imagine what would happen? And these are like tweets that are allowed to stay up, by the way.
Yeah.
And what would happen if this was, you know, any other race that was targeted? I think we need to, despite history, because we can look at through history when all races have been, if say a tribe that happened to be white was treated one way by a tribe that happened to be a different color. It's like we can look at various options of or basic outcomes of how racism has played out. But I think we need to be sensitive to all forms of racisms and correct people on those whenever they do pop up. And it doesn't matter who's the target.
Yep, I agree. And it's another one of those things that I understand why they post those things and why people click love on them. And it's not because they're bad people. It's because they've been seeing all this news about white nationalists burning people's houses and stuff, or they had a bad experience with somebody who told them to go back to another country or something. And I understand the emotional impulses, but like you, I believe that if we rose above those contributing factors, because that really makes things worse, it shows supremacists, it gives them more ammo, and it gives them something to point to. So without all that, I feel like we could do a lot better to heal and come together, and without any intervention, that I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it's like if you see a group of people who say they're white supremacists doing something terrible, it's like these people are terrible. White people saying that white people are terrible, or black people, or brown people, or pink people are terrible. It's like, why go there? I don't get that impulse. It just is so foreign to my frame of thinking.
This is another issue where skepticism would help a lot, because people are acting based on emotion. Like I said, they see something they don't like and then they post kill white people or less white people or whatever. And while I understand what goes into that, I also know that they had been thinking skeptically and thinking like, hey, what could this cause? Would this be helpful to my cause? Would this benefit anyone really? And just give it some additional thought, maybe look in history what happens when people overreact to things that they see in the media and stuff, and kind of make a better decision. So I feel like, again, if we just had more skepticism, more critical thinking awareness, we could do a lot on this subject too.
Right. Okay, let's delve into the Me Too realm. How do you evaluate claims of sexual harassment?
I feel like this is an issue that's a pretty difficult one, because when it comes to hard evidence, there often isn't any, and that's not because the event didn't happen, but because of the nature of the types of incidents we're talking about. But I feel like at the same time, the courts have made a pretty good balancing act here of kind of using personal testimony to paint the picture of what happened, using corroborating evidence, using other statements all the parties have made. And I feel like what's happening in a lot of the public opinion trials is that people aren't really looking at any of the evidence at all. They don't really care. They know that there's been an accusation, and they know that that means that this person's terrible. And I don't think that that's the fault of the Me Too movement. I think that it's all going to balance out in the end, because we're going to realize that we definitely need to believe victims, and we also need to protect people from false accusations at the same time.
Yeah, it's very difficult because it's potentially the deadliest warfare in the political sphere.
Yeah.
That could be used if people were using it for that purpose. But, we have to protect against the fact that this very well could all be true, what's being claimed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's incorrect to believe the claims, but I think it's, we have to treat the claims as if they may very well be true.
Yep,
and
that's a good way to say it.
Yeah, and we don't tell the victims that. We say we're going to do everything to protect you and to make sure you're taken care of. It's like and I agree with you. I think the courts are doing a better job. And I originally, when this first started happening, I was saying there's got to be a prejudgment. There's got to be something that happens quickly so that, in order for people's reputations not to be destroyed needlessly, if in fact there is some things happening here that aren't true, what's being claimed. But yeah, it's difficult. What do you think in general about this intellectual movement, kind of the rise of Jordan Peterson, this intellectual dark web? I call it the intellectual warm blanket. I just think it's way better. I mean, I tweeted out today that I don't think it's like this cryptic dark thing. I think it's this warm, comforting thing, this movement towards intellectual discourse and non-triggerisms and things like that. What do you think?
I'm definitely in favor of all forms of rational discourse that doesn't de-escalate into something terrible. I don't know much about the intellectual dark web, and the only interactions I've had regarding Jordan Peterson have been very negative on his part, which is strange because I see so many things online that say he's intelligent and rational and kind of painted as a beacon of rational discourse. And then I see things like about how he says that his daughter's all-meat diet cured his depression, his undiagnosed autoimmune disorder, and his depression. And I'm like, these things aren't even possible, let alone reasonable. And then that, obviously, that's one example, but that's the type of thing that I see. And I just feel like a lot of people in that realm don't really care about objective truth as much as they care about arguing to make things appear to be true. It's more like lawyers than anything else.
Yeah, he's got, I mean, Jordan is, the thing about Jordan, I spent a lot of time with him, the man is a genius. And just because you're a genius doesn't mean that you can't make, false claims or have your wires crossed in crazy ways on certain things. Because I think from when it comes to clinical psychology and self-authoring, these things that he's done fucking amazing things for humanity in his work. And just hearing the guy talk about, the importance of IQ testing and different things that he has discovered in his teachings, what he's, the scholarly work that he's contributed in those realms, are fantastic. But the things he's really known for right now, it's like his the man,
atheism's irrational.
Well, and the thing that's crazy about that is that he is an atheist. He doesn't believe in the scientifically true existence of a God. It's like he doesn't believe that a God actually exists. He believes in the metaphoric truth of a God. And this is something that Sam Harris was trying to get out of him. He was just trying to get him to agree that he believes in this metaphorical truth. And then, like on the diet thing, even his most devout fans, I think their eyebrows raise into their hairline.
Yeah, I mean, and it's okay, though. It's okay to disagree with somebody on certain things and still understand that they can do positive work elsewhere. And I have heard good words about his work in his professional work, in his published studies in his clinical psychology, I've heard good things. And so I'm not going to say that he's a net bad thing for humanity or anything. I just have seen the few things that have popped up on my radar have been particularly out there. And I'm like, what is going on over here?
Yeah. I think Jordan Peterson is actually, in a funny ways, he's a bridge from the, not necessarily the alt-right, but the right wing over to the center. And I think he is, his work is forcing a lot of people to think about things that those people typically weren't doing a lot of thinking. So I think in that regard, he's pretty important.
One thing I think that he would agree with me on is that the most important thing is that we do talk about basically anything that we want to talk about. We basically need to get our thoughts out there and hear what other people think. And as a human species, as our species is particularly social, we need to be discussing things. We need to be growing and learning from those conversations. And I think a lot of people on the far right and the far left want to shut down conversations and kind of make everything an echo chamber. And while people are free to do that in their own homes or in their own personal lives, I just think as a general rule, we should avoid that in the public sphere.
Right. Okay, and let's move on to this final question. What is the greatest ideological threat to humanity?
I think the greatest ideological threat to humanity kind of touches back to our very first question. It's the glorification of stupidity, of ignorance, I would say is a better classification for that, and the demonization of intelligence, of academia. It's painted as elite. It's painted as something that should be avoided. And so when there's a political group based on reason and evidence and has a science-based platform based on peer-reviewed scientific data, people avoid it specifically because they don't want that. And that's something that it seems strange to me, because everyone should want that. But at the same time, got to realize that that's not the case. And in the United States, at least, there's a fierce ideological opposition to intelligence, to knowledge itself, to science, and that has to be stopped if we're going to get anywhere as a country.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I call all of this, what you're talking about, anti-science.
Yep.
And I think anti-science is the greatest threat to humanity. And I spend most of my life, and it sounds like you do a lot of this work too, trying to eradicate anti-science any way that you can.
Yeah. Definitely. That's the best thing we can do for this world.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Yeah. We'll talk again. And everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Pangburn Philosophy Podcast, and let art and science inspire.